Hi. So today I would like to talk about boundary interactions and operators. Now, these might be new terms to you, and how they apply to cognitive functions may be in a way that you're not used to, but I'll lay it out and see what you think. So, when we talk about objects, and please recall that I consider both concepts and things to be objects, those objects have certain qualities. Those qualities that define it as the object and make it discrete versus all the qualities it doesn't have, right? So there's both an explicit and an implicit quality that everything has, right? So if I'm me, that also implies I'm not everything else, right? So there's a boundary to my me-ness, right? Inside that boundary is me, and outside that boundary is not me, right? If I take a brick, right, the brick has a particular shape, and within that shape, I can find brick stuff. But if I go outside that shape, I don't have brick stuff anymore. I have other things, right? So the shape of the brick defines itself against the rest of the objects in space. Now, the same is true with concepts. Concepts have definable boundaries that make them discrete and different from every other concept. So any concept is what it is because it's not everything else as much as it is itself, right? So this is just basic duality here. Now, we sort these objects based on these boundaries. And if you're an SE type, you'll be very good at identifying object boundaries for physical objects in space. If you're an NE type, you'll be very good at identifying the concept boundaries for concepts in the mind. And we have these things called operators that we use to modify the boundaries of these objects, right? Now, the one in space I think is the easiest to understand, so I'll start with that. So imagine I have a hammer and I have a stone. Now, both of those objects have certain boundaries that I could define. And let's say we take the stone's shape, right? And that's a particular boundary that we're concerned with. Well, I can interact the two objects across their boundaries, right? And I can modify one, the other, or both. And I do that through an operator. Now, I use the term operator because it fits a little better with both concepts and with actions. It would be weird to apply action as a term for concept modification, at least to me. So I just use operators, right? And I consider actions in the world to be operators. Now, I can use an operator like swinging the hammer, an action, right, to modify the boundaries of the stone. Because I can smash it to bits with the hammer. The stone is no longer what it was. Its boundary that used to define it as what it was is now different, right? There might be a whole bunch of boundaries and a whole bunch of stones now because I've smashed it. Well, in this way, we can consider every action an operator. And when we do that, we can think of it as an object, but a temporal object that only exists in time. And it only exists in time so that it can modify other objects, right? So we can break down any series of actions and objects into operators and objects. And then we can also describe it in terms of the functions that were at play based on the influence or effluence of those objects, whether we're starting with a concept and modifying an object with another object, or if we're starting with an object and modifying a concept with another concept, or starting with a concept and modifying a concept, right? That's what defines the cognitive functions for me. So anyway, all of that said, to give you an example on the conceptual side, right? I think people will be a little more aware of like mathematical operators, right? Let's say I have the times symbol and I have the concepts 3 and 4, right? Those are both objects. They're metaphysical concepts, but they're objects nonetheless. And I can interact those boundaries through this third object or operator in this sense, but only exists during the interaction, right? So as soon as I'm done with the operation, the time symbol doesn't really mean anything anymore. It doesn't matter to me in the operation. It only has a real qualitative meaning while I'm using it. And in that time, it's modifying the boundaries of 3 and 4, and it's giving me 12, which is a new object with new boundaries, right? Now, anyway, to sum all this up, any chain of events, whether mental or physical, we can reduce to its operators, its objects, and we can plot out the boundary interactions across time. Now, the interesting thing is, the interesting case is, we've gone over what happens with object and object interactions. We've talked about concept interactions. Well, what happens when we interact a concept and an object, right? Well, there's this metaphysical physical barrier. They don't interact that way. So what happens is we get perception. So I make the claim that the sense of consciousness, of perceptual consciousness, this idea that I exist and am witnessing something, is the product of boundary interactions across the physical and metaphysical plane between concepts and objects. And I'm going to make the claim that the prime objects, the first ones to appear at the moment of consciousness, are I, the concept I, and the physical object am, right? So this I amness is what you start as. And then by interacting with different objects and different concepts, and through the concatenations of interactions, we get this really rich experience as we differentiate ourselves as objects and our self-concept as an object and everything else in our environment. So anyway, I wanted to just give you that to chew over. Please forgive me, I'm a little congested right now. But yeah, tell me if you found that interesting. Thanks.